When we think about purpose and reasons for being, pursuing those wants, needs, desires, assessing how we've been doing along the way and reconciling all the things that are thrown at us in this life, trying to fit all the strange pieces into the puzzle that is this earthbound human existence. I think we're often convinced that we haven't done enough, or that we're behind schedule. We're not doing all that we can do to advance ourselves or to address things in the world, to fix things, whether it's in your family or community, province, nation state, or even, civilization, depending on your scope and perspective. But I think it's also important to remember that essentially nothing much will change from the day you're born, and will continue to be largely the same the day you pass on, back from whence you came. And that's up for grabs. Believe what you will about all of that. The point is, and the subject of this particular video is, you have done enough. Because firstly, you can't ever get behind or fall behind, because who or what are you comparing yourself to? You're unique, you're individual. Comparisons are useful if we're trying to improve and better ourselves, but the more we compare ourselves to someone else, the more we try to live by someone else's standards and values and priorities, the less we're being honest and authentic about who we are and what we genuinely want and need and desire to have out of this life. So keep those things in a proper perspective. They're useful as tools. They're useful as measurements and ways to reassess where you are at various periods and milestones along your journey. But ultimately, your journey, your path is your own, and you'll have to discern for yourself what that means and what your purpose is and what it's all about for you. What we will find, and what you've probably discovered along your journey, is that the more conditions and dimensions and layers that you put upon yourself, things that you must know, that you must understand, that you must do something about, the more you pile on with these ideas and these concepts, the more burdened and weighted that you tend to become in your day-to-day life experience. These things are cumulative, as I've spoken about before. All these ideas and conditions and rules that you're putting upon yourself, and then add to that everything else that your various society or culture or family unit or community would pile on and inculcate throughout your life, simply by proximity and by being close to them and being exposed to those ideas, living in a certain way, in a certain environment, in certain circumstances that programs and conditions you in entirely unconscious ways, until you shed some light on them, until you expose them, until you become aware of just how pervasive these ideas and programs and conditions have been. But at no point is there the real issue that you haven't done enough. So the standards that you live by, critical and important and potentially transformational and motivational, depending on your personality type and how prone you are to the various ways of expressing these things, because some of us tend to be more the doers, the alphas, the extroverts, and the people who just like to get shit done and are motivated and inspired and energized by these things. Others are more philosophical, observant, considerate, and more of a hands-off, and can and will certainly be willing to get their hands dirty. But that's not their main motivating factor. That's not their main motivating through line in this life. And there's everything in between. When we look at what motivates and what inspires and what gets us out of bed in the morning, what we can put our energies into throughout the day that will spend all of that creative potential that is inbuilt and that is recharged on the daily, that we choose and decide what to do with and where to put it to in any day of our life. So the more we pile on these ideas and these pressures and these conditions and terms, the more we may inadvertently handicap ourselves and even retard our progress in a certain manner, again, dependent on what it is you truly value and prioritize in this life, because that's as unique as your fingerprints, right? And it can change as often as the weather, dependent on how committed you are and how disciplined you are in any particular aspect of your life. But the point is that at any point along the journey, things could surprisingly end. You could come to an untimely demise. You could become terminally ill, what have you. You may have some sort of extreme trauma happen, a severe injury of some kind that forces you to completely shift your perspective. Nobody wants or expects these things. Nobody can really prepare for these things either. But if you did come to an untimely demise and your avatar expired, I seriously doubt that there would be any judgment as to regrets and, oh, if only I had more time. We do that a lot, and primarily to and for ourselves, right? We pressure and push ourselves in these unconscious and conscious ways to improve and to progress and to be better and stronger and more resilient, what have you. But in the process, we tend to forget perhaps the true reasons for existence, the true reasons for even being here, and that is simply to just play the game, to be part of this whole experience as dynamic and strange and full of contrast and conflict and polarity that it is. It's completely unpredictable and yet cyclical, right? There are things that happen historically and throughout nations and right down to the societal and communal level that just repeat. Further to that, perhaps coupled with that or correlated with that, is foundational and powerful ideas, paradigm shifts that happen that, again, repeat about the nature of this reality. You know, is the Earth the center of the universe? Is the sun the center of the solar system? Is there such thing as a solar system? Are we in a closed system? Are we in a simulation? All of these things that can threaten your identity at the deepest levels, because if you don't know whereupon you stand, how do you really know what you're working toward? How do you know what you actually should prioritize and value? How do you actually have any concept of what reality is? So these are important things to take into consideration when you're framing your priorities, framing your plans, your actions, when you can really take a good and critical look at the apparent challenges and the apparent issues and problems coming up in the world, because none of them really need to exist for the most part. And I've spoken about the idea of manufactured crises. So when we look at politics, geopolitics, specifically these problems that are over there, and yet we should be concerned about them 24/7, it's just more ways that these scripts play out to draw your attention, to fragment your consciousness and your psychic and spiritual energies over there, which you can do nothing about and have actually no way to verify whether to be real or true or happening in any way as they suggest it is. Because if you were to go there in person, you would probably find just the opposite or worse. You would probably see that all of it, not just these most recent events, but going back decades and generations, has been complete fiction. And how would that shake your reality to realize that, once again, you've been lied to about virtually everything in this life? So how are you lying to yourself? How are you internalizing these things? If you're even paying attention to that, if you're even taking the time to discern and consider the beliefs and ideas that you're taking into yourself and living by every single day. The ideas that shape your reality are under some constant sort of distortion and manipulation. And that serves as a reminder, I think, an important reminder that we have to take it upon ourselves to discern what's authentic, real, and true, as I've said many times now. The more we defer to some external authority, the more we defer to some centralized authority, especially all of these institutions and industries that tell us what is real and tell us what problems are and make the laws that we're supposed to live by, but they themselves can just, who cares? They can do as they please. They're just more control mechanisms. They're more factors of manipulation that exist in this realm that are just elements to the game, right? If you're seeking the truth of these things, there's endless rabbit holes. There's 100,000 different ways you can get caught up for 5, 10, 15, 25 and more years to try and discern the truth about. Is that important to you? Is that going to be enough if you ever truly find what is true about something? Can you even ever really discover what's true? Are you going to be able to find original source material to any of these things? Will that satisfy that hunger? Or in the process of those years of effort, will you forget that you've been programmed and rewired, and your consciousness has been twisted around in certain ways that has created a certain person in you, of you, that will no longer accept truth even when you see it? That you will be stuck in this questioning, sort of cynical, post-truth kind of mindset where nothing will really satisfy that hunger? Could it be more useful to frame things differently in the first place, to consider whatever avenues that you're going to pursue, is it ever going to be enough? Are you ever going to get to where it's, okay, I understand that now. I've done enough.
Putting the blame on a brother for shadows you bring of your own.
Fundamentally, the whole point of this diatribe is to circle around to answering those questions from within, because that's where the only real answers can come from, right? That original creative spark that animates us, that created this existence, this individuation that we are, is the immortal within, and that is the source from which we can actually draw any real and true information about anything whenever we want. It's just that we're trained to flip that. We're trained to flip the script, to go from outside in, to learn, to soak up the knowledge, to get mentored, to be educated from the texts and the scriptures and the wise people who have been here longer than us, to take in information from all sorts of sources, from interviews, from documentaries, from films, novels, books, etc., etc., etc. We have to put ourselves into intense study for year upon year upon year. Otherwise, we won't ever get to know. We won't ever get to do enough. We won't ever have enough of a foundation with which to truly understand what's going on. And I'm saying, of course, that's opposite. And we all eventually get to this point where we realize that there's no amount of information, no amount of data, no amount of inputs that you can take on that will satisfy, because there will always be holes in that information. There will always be the interpretations and obfuscations, unintentional or intentional, on offer by those who are themselves perhaps reinterpreting information handed down, which was already incomplete in the first place. So how can you possibly get enough and feel satisfied and fulfilled by learning and finding and deriving wisdom in that way? It's simply not possible, right? So ultimately, when we anchor that and begin to realize that living from the inside out, as Michael Neal would suggest and speaks about frequently, to reorient our perspective and idea of consciousness and thought, and the whole purpose of this kind of living, this kind of expression, this kind of understanding, is to realize that at any given point, we have most certainly done enough, because we'll never get it done. If we keep the program and condition and aspiration within us wherein we need to feel some sort of satisfaction, some completion, some unknowable destination, we will never get there. And that could be in itself, for some people, inspiring and motivational. Just to have that goal, that destination, that challenge that's always just out of reach, because we can forever move the goalposts, right? We can forever change our paradigm, or life is just going to throw it at us. There'll be another gross attack on mass society. There'll be another 9/11. There'll be another COVID. There'll be another what have you, and all the tiny little smaller variations of these events that happen between these milestone sort of frauds and hoaxes and attacks on cultures and societies and civilization at large that, push us in one direction or another en masse. And what we can be certain of is that the general population will never be properly informed or fully informed about anything, because to some interests, to some entities, to some oligarchs, to some whoever and whatever that force or energy or influence in this reality might be, the general population is an asset of sorts. It's an energy source. It's a plaything. So do you want to be part of that herd, or are you going to try and break away from that a little bit and look at things a little differently and retake that agency and that autonomy and that authority, even if you have to contend with the struggles and the stresses and the attacks and the impositions, right? Even if you have to deal with all those things, I think that mind flip, that inside out sort of perspective could be perhaps more satisfactory and satisfying and fulfilling over the long run than trying to figure things out and trying to, put things into certain slots and file folders. Okay, that's the truth about that. That's the truth about that. That's the truth about that. I don't have to think that anymore. Whatever works for you, right? And thinking about things from the spiritual perspective, thinking that we have to come to some sort of understanding or some level of forgiveness, or to be reborn, or to go through some sort of ritualistic process to gain access to the afterlife, or to the happy place after you die. These things are, to me, quite childish and ridiculous, and things that we will discover if we take it upon us to gain some spiritual and emotional maturity throughout this life, and to realize that all of these stories, all of these manipulations of historical events, historical figures, the people that you're told to worship and to believe and to give your soul to, are simply variations on a theme that are, again, regurgitated. The same scripts are regurgitated and reused throughout time immemorial, throughout the millennia. And they come in various cycles dependent on where a civilization might be technologically today, right? We have the internet. We've had it for about 30 something years now. Now we have AI and all of this further, faster, more progressive, more integrated information processing capacity, which perhaps ironically has expedited the idea of dumbing the society down, because we defer even more of our critical thinking, of our discernment, of our capacity for understanding and comprehension to the machines. That's not by accident either, is it? So when we are given certain ideas that could terrify us and scare us to the core about what will happen to our soul, and what ultimately is this whole journey for, what do we have to go through to make sure to take care of before our untimely or timely, or our expiration, however that may happen. These are just distortions of reality. These are just more ways to knock you off your path and to push you away from your better understanding, to drag you out from your center and keep you permanently dissociated. No matter what perspective, what idea you've been fed, to me, they're inaccurate, incomplete, and simply delusions of grandeur put upon by those who want to control your heart and your mind, and to utilize your creative spark and your creative energies for their own means. Maybe that's fine, but ultimately, what's real, your essence, what's true about you, that immortal within, is immortal. So you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff, in my view. Figure it out for yourself. But to me, the simplest things are generally the truest things. So we don't need to overcomplicate the idea of the soul's journey and the point of our existence and what will come after if we don't say and do and go through certain processes and practices and rituals and beliefs, and to be fearful of what might happen if we don't accept things and believe in certain things and hand over all authority to something outside of us. The whole idea of this particular talk was inspired by Matt at Quantum of Conscience, and it's a topic that he brings up quite frequently in his most recent videos. This whole idea of that you have done enough, I have done enough. It's from the perspective of dispelling the fears and the terrors and the similar ideas that I was just talking about regarding your soul and what comes after. And the fear that is inculcated throughout society, through media, through scripture, through faith-based systems, through spiritual practice, even through the materialistic science point of view, and some of the nonsense that they purport to know and understand about the nature of reality, when all they can keep doing is making up ideas that are dark matter, dark energy, dark whatever, to fill in the 90% plus gap of what they simply need to make their formulas work. It's garbage. It's not science. But when your science is funded by those who are just bent on twisting things around to keep everyone a little bit confused, a little bit dissociated from who and what they really are, you will pay scientists and the researchers to Find ways to fit that model, not throw out the model and start fresh, and actually pursue proper scientific processes and practices. Ultimately, regardless of where you are on your journey, perhaps consider the idea that you have done enough, and to kind of settle into it, because there will be plenty of things to agitate and to make you anxious and fearful and worried about that'll come at you in this life. And some of that will be based on the challenges that you set for yourself, the path or career or vocation, family, whatever you are particularly interested in pursuing in this one short life. Don't pile on the idea that pressure, that angst of the lie that you're behind, that you need to catch up, that you need to be doing more, or that you've failed yourself in some way, because that's simply not possible, in my view. We're not here to finish anything. We're here to explore and experience and experiment with this life, and we don't know how long we get. So we need to just kind of understand that all of our attachments to things and outcomes, all of our fears of potentials, fears of getting what we have, and fears of getting what we don't want. Dr. John DeMartini talks a lot about this and the psychology of how we trap ourselves and, throw ourselves into these unfulfilling cycles and these sort of psychotic things that we can bring up and create for ourselves strictly out of illusions and getting stuck in the circular patterns and circular thinking, right? All based on logical fallacies and misplaced beliefs and ideas. So catch yourself if you can when you're doing those types of things, and pursue the information and teachings and understandings that are more perhaps foundational and the first principle ideas, right? Step back from all of the noise. Step back from all the 100 billion details and ideas of things that you're trying to get a grasp on. Step back from all of that and what's the actual foundational thing that is being spoken about there, or that you need to perhaps discern and embrace and summon, and perhaps summon from within you, because that's what actually matters. And once you tap that particular source, you'll realize you'll never do enough, you'll never succeed enough, you'll never attain enough, you'll never understand enough, you'll never be able to take in enough information, you'll never have enough experiences. But at no point along the way have you failed yourself, have you cut yourself short, have you screwed yourself over, have you limited yourself to be able to experience life in any way that you may, in your heart, in your mind, imagine you'd want to experience this life. There's always a way to reorient and recalibrate and start again, regardless of age, circumstance, or situation. You have done enough. I have done enough. Start with that. That's a first principle idea, right? That's a foundational notion with which to approach big ideas, small ideas, life-changing ideas, basic everyday ideas. Don't overload yourself or overwhelm yourself based on some sort of extrinsic ideas and inputs and conditions and programming. Don't overload yourself and pressure yourself in unnatural ways that harm you more than help you. Don't avoid, of course, growth. Don't avoid challenging and pushing and breaking and remaking yourself. That's a whole different idea. The point is that you assume these challenges, and then you assume and take that responsibility and that autonomy and that agency back, so that you're working from a place of conscious creativity as opposed to reaction and reactivity. Both will serve you, but one is likely far more fulfilling because it is self-initiated, right? We are the ultimate of initiates in our own life, and we ultimately decide whether we have done enough. There are no ultimate conditions that you need to fulfill. There are no rites or rituals that you need to satisfy. There's nothing that is real and true about you that can come to harm just because you might have pursued life in a different way, and that because you have experienced life in a certain way and feel that you may have failed or fallen short from some ideals. There's nothing that's trapping you here. There's nothing that tricked you into coming into this life. None of that. These are all distortions and illusions and trickery, and most of it exists only in the separated, defragmented, and dissociated mind, not in the real mind, not in the real the God mind, you might say, like Walter Russell might say. What's real about you can't come to harm. Don't worry about it. And in my view, you've done enough. Have a good one.
What will be your legacy? What will be your legacy? Your